And anyway, I've been asked to substitute for John, and it's kind of ironic because when I was at the University of Rochester, John used to save me on numerous occasions when I needed slides or needed presentation material at the last minute. John was always there for me, being the specialist in slides and in presentation media at the university. So when I was asked to cover John, it was kind of interesting because after all these many years, I get to take his spot when he's always covered me in the past. I guess I'd like to begin by sharing with you the original DeWitt Clinton's dream concerning the canal. And basically this was his original speech, and a portion of this I think kind of summarizes the ideas for this conference, his idea as it was in the past century, and what we're looking at for today and in the future for the canal. Governor's dream, he said, as a bond of union between the Atlantic and Western states, it may prevent the dismemberment of the American Empire. As an organ of commerce between the Hudson and the Mississippi, the St. Lawrence, the Great Lakes of the North and West, and their tributary rivers, it will create the greatest inland trade route ever witnessed. The most fertile and extensive regions of America avail themselves to its facilities for a market. All their surplus productions, whether of the soil, the forest, the mines, or the waters, their fabrics, their art, and their supplies of foreign commodities will concentrate in the city of New York for transportation abroad or consumption at home. Agriculture, manufactures, commerce, trade, navigation, and the arts will receive a correspondent encouragement. The city will, in the course of time, become the granary of the world, the emporium of commerce, the seat of manufacturers, the focus of great moneyed operations, and the concentrating point of vast, disposable, and accumulating capitals, which will stimulate, enliven, extend, and reward the exertions of human labor and ingenuity in their processes and exhibitions. And before the revolution of the century, the whole island of Manhattan will be covered with inhabitants and replenished with a dense population that will one day constitute a vast city. This was DeWitt Clinton's dream. And of course, all of you know, at that time, many people didn't feel it was all that appropriate, and some people thought that his dream for New York being the vast jewel of the empire, which it is today, was a fantasy. Well, it was quite a vision for a man of the 18th and 19th centuries. He saw the wilderness of upstate New York a vast, undeveloped resource. And many didn't share his vision. Thomas Jefferson, an engineer himself, declared the project could not be undertaken for at least another 100 years. So what kind of beautiful people built the canal? And for what reason did they accomplish what they accomplished? Well, an excerpt from an article written in 1958 by historian Richard Wright makes it a little easier to understand. Wright says, the Grand Canal was planned and built by the citizens of a struggling community who saw half the proceeds of their sizable surplus products absorbed by freight costs. They analyzed their need and planned a workable solution. And when no outside help was obtainable, they built their own canal, inventing the necessary tools, the necessary methods, and as the work went on, creating, as they studied and overcame obstacles, the profession of civil engineering, which until then had not existed. The canal was called the eighth wonder of the world. It proved to all doubters that free men under democratic government could accomplish in a few years an objective that no monarchy had ever dared undertake. It attached the whole basin of the Great Lakes to the Atlantic seaboard. It inspired other states and the federal government itself to take a firm hold of their bootstraps and start lifting. Another historian, Dr. John H. Farley, more humbly described DeWitt Clinton by saying that DeWitt Clinton not only changed the face of the earth, but in doing so affected the whole course of civilization and gave New York the opportunity to become the capital of a recreated world. Now, what was built as a result of this vision was the Erie Canal, which, as an eighth wonder of the world, was almost beyond comprehension. The original Erie was funded through the New York State Legislature for about $4 million. The final cost was $6 million. It was 363 miles of trench, measuring 40 feet by 28 foot by 4 feet, dug largely by man and animal power through solid rock, thick virgin forest, malarial swamps, raging rivers across a huge valley. The Erie Canal lifted boats to an 83 lock, 553 height foot to the level of the Lake Erie. The men who worked on the canal were paid $8 a month, providing, of course, the month had 28 rain-free days. Every 2 hours, they were offered a shot of whiskey to keep them going. They slept in damp, drafty sheds and ate the coarsest food available from their contractors. The canal was started on July 4th, 1817, and completed and officially opened on October 26, 1825, 8 years ahead of schedule. Today, we have a tremendous resource, a modern canal running through New York State with almost unlimited potential. Today, we also have a tremendous resource to overhaul the present canal system and to develop as an asset and a resource. And so we're here today, in 1990, stepping out to an adventure, not unlike that which confronted the early men and women responsible for the original Erie Canal. Erie has called this conference in order to see what the different groups, in their own unique ways, can learn from others, share what they're doing, and together restore the Erie Canal for generations to enjoy forever in the future. Now, we in many ways stand at the door of the future, as did the men and women of long ago Erie Canal. We're the ones who will have to see the visions of the future canal developing and pursue them, possibly facing opposition just as DeWitt Clinton did. We're the men and women called to restore and preserve our canal, and together, understanding the insights gained in the first conference, I think will prevail. And those are John Grove's words, and I'm freely borrowing them. But I think this summarizes the goals of this conference, the idea of bringing together a number of diverse interests. We have the actual operation of the canal, we have environmental people, we have legislators, users of the canal, and I think this will be a very interesting conference. And well, without any further ado, I'll get Mark DeCracker, who's the president of Erie, to come up and tell you a bit more about Erie.
I'd like to thank you all for coming today. This is, was a dream of mine 2 years ago. When we got Erie started up, one of the first things that we talked about was having a conference. We brought all the groups across the state of New York together to form a federation or a coalition to advocate for the future of the canal. This is great. I appreciate everybody showing up today. I'd like to John Groves has just been a great catalyst for us. I'd like to, everybody take a minute to say a prayer for his father, because he has absolutely been there every minute that we needed him. John is presently, he's been our editor for our newsletter. He put together this computer program. Spent all week doing that, and has always been there on any cleanup day. We said, this is a great person. I'm sorry he isn't here today. I'd like to thank Alan Burke for filling in at the last minute. I was scurrying all day yesterday morning. I had called, I got references all the way to Lockport. This jockey in Lockport would give a call to come down. And if he wasn't on until 12 o'clock, he would have come down. But Dr. Burke filled in out. I'm very thankful for you for doing that.
It's a good cause. I want to see it succeed.
Sure. Well, 2 years ago, I don't want to spend a lot of time going over this because you probably already read about it. But I was just out filming a little video of history of lions, and in my video screen, all I saw was garbage and grapevines and overgrowth. And I was trying to duplicate this wonderful picture that's on one of Tom Garaslo's canal tour guides there, with the mules and the pack of boats with Hotchkiss in the background. This wouldn't happen. And so I went back, and I was upsetting to me. I sat down, and that winter worked up. First of all, I had to have an acronym, so I started with barge. I said, no, there's already a barge. So I sat down with Erie and worked these different things up and came up with Erie's restoration interest everywhere. And it wasn't doing me any good to sit back and just keep that filed away in file 13 in one of my files at home. So I started generating some ideas of what I thought the total restoration and restoring could take place, and ended up Senator Moynihan was coming to Lyons in April of '88, and my sister called me and said, well, you ought to take your canal ideas and present it to Senator Moynihan because he's appropriating $5 million. So that was a spark that got things going. It only took about a week to get it written up then and finalized, and went to a friend of mine who's we've done a lot of hiking together in Adirondacks, and he had this great graphic book that he put together, Tim McFall, and he put the logo together in 3 days. this is great. So at the meeting where we gave the presentation, the proposal, and the logo to Senator Moynihan, there were numerous people that came up front and said, what a great idea, let's get things rolling. And if it wasn't for them, we wouldn't be here today. And one of those, I'd like to thank, I don't know if Claudia is here. She was at the registration desk. She was one of the first initiators, and as well as Pauline. Pauline, raise your hand. And it was for them, like I said, the ball got rolling. And since then, we've been growing and prospering, and here we are today having a state conference. One of our goals, and it's the goals of everybody here, is to have revitalization of the canal and restoration. And we like to have this twofold. Not only do we want to improve the existing canal we have today with docking facilities, bed and breakfasts, restaurants, we also want to revitalize the old canals. And we have great sections of the enlarged Clinton's Ditch or enlarged Erie and Clinton's Ditch that are untapped. You could ask the average person at the diner when they're having coffee today where Clinton's Ditch is, and the person say, what? Who's he? Was he a governor? They wouldn't know about it. And it's amazing how many structures. I was talking to Tom. I wasn't aware that there was an aqueduct on Clinton's Ditch in Lyons. And I thought I'd been doing some research. So, by the way, I went and tried to check it out, but I got stuck in the mud. So but one of the things that we can do with this is I'd like to work with, I know Jeremy's done a lot of work in the mapping. Franco, Jeremy? Great resource who's worked on restoration in England. I'd like to see us put together a map and guide that would have all three canals, like a feasibility study that would designate the shape that all of them are in, if it's been filled in, and if there's any potential for restoration of the existing canal. I know, for example, right here in Lyons, there are approximately 10 miles of the old enlarged Erie that are fairly intact. There are trees growing in it, but certainly with some efforts, we can get those cleaned out and restore some locks, which I'll talk about in a second. And we're able to, initially, one of the first things that we set as a group to do was to have some a cleanup. We've got to clean up the garbage. We went on one of Peter Wiles. He had us canal tour. We went from Lyons Dry Docks to Widewaters, and it was alarming to see how much garbage had collected along the canal. And all sorts of things, from water heaters to people that had gutted their houses and thrown the remains on the side of the canal. And this is what first thing we have to do is clean up this and make it beautified. So we organized a canal cleanup day, day before Father's Day in June of '88. And we had the villages of Newark and Lyons participating. B. Phillips. B was put this all together, and she, would you have about 55 individuals that came out that day?
In 89. Oh, the one in 88, yes. Yeah.
Right, and it filled up, I believe, 2 dump truck fulls of garbage. And we have some wonderful before and after pictures of that. But believe me, there's still a lot out there. I like B's clever way of recruitment. You want to explain that a little bit, B?
You mean through the schools?
Exactly.
The schools, there were a couple of teachers in school that were very interested in seeing that the students got involved in community affairs. And so they gave them credit. They didn't have to take their test at the end if they got out and did some community work. And so we took advantage of that, and they worked along the canal, and they were very enthusiastic, very much so.
It would be a nice thing that we could, actually thanks Steve for doing that. It'd be a great thing if we could do that through all the schools throughout the state of New York. I think it would be a great experience for them, a learning experience for them to do some community service work along with their education, maybe be elective in their senior class, or all the way up through they should be doing things. And as a result of the efforts and work, we can tie this education into the requirement that 4th graders have participation in local history. Peter Wiles does a great job with taking the kids from Fairport and Pittsford on canal rides in May and June. And I think another step on that we take is to completely restore a lock or an aqueduct, as Lance can show us later, and have the kids see that firsthand. If they can actually go through an old lock with remove the gates back and forth, I think it would be a great moving experience for them. I don't know if I finished talking about the map, but anyway, getting back to that, I got distracted a little bit. it would be nice to have this map that would be done with all the 3 canals in a booklet form, so as an educational tool. So once this is done, we can then go ahead and prioritize what we feel is important. A few of those things that I think are important right now is I'd like to, Tom and I have been talking about the possibility of having a canal interpretive center, similar to what we have in Adirondack, an Adirondack Interpretive Center in Paul Smith. And this would be an actual canal site, and there's a couple possibilities Tom and I have talked about, the Erie Creek area or Lions Poorhouse area. I know a lot about Lions Poorhouse, and I'll advocate for that. We have the dry dock facility with David Conroy, and it's a wonderful resource. I know it's only 8 years old, but sooner or later it's going to be as old as everything else, and it's important that we preserve that. We have all sorts of old dredgers and barges there, and it'd be a great source for people to come and visit. And a half mile from there, we have a double lock at Poorhouse Lock. And Miss Ellen Perry is presently living in this wonderful. She has a canal lock in her backyard. It's changed a little bit in the last few months. We've had a program called shock incarceration. They have been out. Does everybody understand what shock incarceration is? Okay, it's basically an option for prisoners to take between the ages of 18 and 24 to opt for getting on parole quicker. And they've done wonderful work for us, and are hard workers, and they work without the use of power tools for 6 hours a day, cutting the brush and restoring parts of the canal. They cleaned up the whole Poorhouse Lock area. In fact, I was out there today in the middle of a snowstorm. Bob Sacha from National Geographic was there filming us, taking some pictures. And I just talked to him the other day, and he believes it's got some great shots, and it should be out in the article later this year, along with some other things like in Lockport, where they had the lock come up and they lit a candlelight service in Lockport. Anybody from Lockport here? Right. So that was so all these things are going to be in there. So we're getting a lot of nice national attention as well. And with this, in addition to this Canal Interpretive Center, possibility I like to push towards having a national monument established. So we have these all across the United States. In Arizona, there's 6 or 7 that are on Indian ruins. So I think the canal is just as important. Maybe we can start right here today with the Sunderland Kings support and push for that at the federal level. Start with the state, but push for it. It might take 10 years, but I think it's a worthwhile thing to work towards. That way, the canal would get the justification and visitation that we really need. So people across the United States know about the Erie Canal, but let's give them a first-class example of what they have done. Lance Matz has done down at Humor Canal Historical Park. They have done restoration and restoring the canal with a complete locks and aqueducts. And we should do the same here in New York. I hate to say it, but I think everybody knows about the great Erie Canal, and so I want to make it that way. I'd like to again thank everybody for showing up today. And one of our objectives before we leave today is to form a federation. So if anybody has a great acronym, just sit down, and if things are going slow, just work with some letters and let us know, because that'll be the first step to getting things going. So we can put the New York State Canal Society, Barge, Erie, and have this federation coalition that we can meet twice a year and work towards some of our objectives and goals. So I'd like to thank everybody for showing up today. Turn it back to Dr. Alan Wirt.
Okay, next up on our list, we're going to be hearing from Tom Grosso, who's the president of the New York State Canal Society. And Tom currently is the chairman of the geology department at Monroe Community College, and has his master's degree from Cornell University. And we were talking just before the program, and he was telling me how he got involved in the canals. He's originally from Buffalo, and when he was up at Cornell doing his master's work, he stumbled across an old canal lock out in the field, and at that time he ended up trying to figure out just exactly what this relic was, and he got hooked, and he's been hooked ever since. So I'll let Tom tell you a bit more about canal history. Tom?
Thank you. I warn you, I'm programmed to speak in 50-minute intervals, at the end of which time you shall receive a Blue Book essay examination. We will hope to get the grades back to you in a short period of time. I'll start with slides. We're going to try to do 160 years of history here or so in about 10 minutes.
Move the podium down just for the sides. Just move the podium down.
The Erie Canal was not the first canal that attempted to link the interior of the continent with the eastern seaboard. However, it was by far the most successful, as it is the only canal that's still in operation, as shown here with the Morania pulling out of a lock near Little Falls. And still is a viable artery for commodities, and we shouldn't ignore that fact. But the success of the Erie Canal, I think, is rooted in the underlying geology. And two very important points that have to be made is, number one, at Albany, the canal is already west of the Appalachian Mountains because the Adirondacks belong to Canada more than they do the Appalachians. And another very significant factor is that New York is blessed with an east-west system of rivers and creeks and drainage, which mean there's a ready conduit for canal construction alongside these streams. And they did it with the high-tech tools of the day, such as these horse-drawn scrapers. They also invented gadgets on the spot, such as this tree stump puller. And looks like a throughway job. Everyone's standing around, one guy working. either that or a railroad. I'm not sure. Anyway, away they went, and who did it? And apparently, it was mostly native-born Americans, Yankees, homegrown, who constructed the first canal. The Irish apparently were more involved in the enlarged Erie that came later. And of course, as we heard, the original canal was 40 feet wide at the top, 28 feet wide at the bottom, and 4 feet deep. But it lowered the cost of moving commodities from Buffalo to New York from $100 a ton to $7 a ton. And the boom towns came to America: Rochester, Syracuse, Buffalo, and so forth. By 1835, the canal had paid back its entire cost, the interest on the loans, the costs for repairs and maintenance, and it was in the green. And a record not to be equaled since, apparently. And be that as it may, from the tolls collected, the first enlargement began. And the dimensions were nearly doubled, not quite. Locks were doubled, aqueducts were widened, etc. Shown here is Clinton's Ditch in the purple line running through Cayuga County, Port Byron and Montezuma. The enlarged Erie, 1835 to 1863 or so, where the canal went to 7 feet deep. That's mostly what we see today, especially through Wayne County, although you are blessed with some excellent Clinton's Ditch structures and prism and so forth. Eventually, there was a small enlargement in the 1890s. That was the second enlargement. The third enlargement of the Erie Canal is, of course, the present barge canal system, which utilizes natural waterways wherever possible versus a canal dug independently of the streams. And for example, here at Montezuma, with the Seneca River in the background. Here's not a very good photograph, but that's the only one I have of the Montezuma Aqueduct when it was in operation. Now, going into Wayne County, one very important, significant thing about Wayne County is that it is blessed also with a very complex system of meltwater channels. Shown here is a natural path carved through the Drumlin Belt, the Erie Canal right alongside, a natural belt carved by meltwaters when the glacier was retreating. This is about 10,000 years ago, all of the meltwaters of the Great Lakes spilled eastward across a large river channel stretching from Fairport all the way to Clyde. And that natural path, which is now pretty much abandoned except for Mud Creek and a few other streams, that natural path then was utilized not only by the Erie Canal, but New York Central Railroad later, and of course Route 31 today. But had it not been for this, feature, the canal construction through Wayne County would have been much more difficult. Imagine trying to get a canal up and down a series of drumlin hills, 100 or 200 feet high. And of course, the remains here at Clyde, a toll pulling westward out of Clyde, Clinton's Ditch Lock, modified for a waste weir during the enlarged Erie. This is just east of Loch Berlin. And of course, another view of it, a modified Clinton's Ditch Lock as an enlarged Erie waste weir. And then the lock at Loch Berlin before the park was completed there, showing some woodwork still remaining. That is presently underwater as they put the dam here and raised the level of the canal. An enlarged Erie lock would have looked something like this when it was in operation. This is a Mohawk Valley enlarged Erie lock, but you could see the wood pilings here that we saw in the previous slide. There were wooden walkways, gates, so forth and so on. A lock house in the middle, perhaps a grocery store or hotel alongside, and all laid on wooden planks with wooden piling driven beneath. So the whole thing is resting on a wooden platform to prevent differential subsidence. And going closer toward Lyons now, this lock at Lyons, right behind your the new construction, new buildings, you know the name of it better than I, the social services. And that lock is somewhat unique because it was the first lock to be enlarged on the Erie, yet it was the last one to be doubled. So it stayed as an enlarged single chamber lock until the 1870s, when it was 1875 or so when it was finally doubled. And of course the aqueduct over Mud Creek at Lyons. Now just about all gone except for these two wing walls on each end. You can see the wooden trunk. Well, it must have looked something like this, although not that many. This model doesn't have as many piers or arches as the Lyons aqueduct did on the enlarged Erie, but certainly that's the way it must have looked at one time. And then progressing westward, of course, the Lyons Dry Dock, which is now you have excellent barge structures in the vicinity, and that's so forth. And finally over towards the Poorhouse Lock, shown there, and the farm bridge in front of it, just west of Lyons. And that's the way it looks today with lock gates. Well, not today because it's a little snowy up there. Anyway, last year. And excellent lock, capable of restoration, ideally suited for it. Much of the hardware is still on that lock, as shown there. And going westward towards Newark, the canal running through Newark, and finally on to Palmyra. And so, in summation, the canal in Wayne County then is certainly well adapted for restoration in part or in total. And you have all three canals. There aren't many places in the state where you have all three canals, one right next to the other. So there's the ditch, the enlarged Erie, and the present barge canal system.
Okay, that was a very interesting highlight of the history of the canal. Now to talk a little bit more about the goals and objectives of Erie. We'll get Mark back, and Pauline, if you could come up and let the both of you sort of share the podium here and tell a little bit about what the people here involved in the Erie program have been doing.
Actually, I went over most of that earlier, so I'm going to have Pauline come up to save some time. And she has put together a program on the master plan for the future of the canals. Pauline's been a great source. I have a list, I have a file at home with this thick of letters from Pauline through this whole last 2 years. So she has just been, she's got into it so much, she's gone on to Syracuse for a degree in landscape architecture. She hopes to have a vital link in the transformation of the canals in the future. Thank you, Pauline.
What's her last name?
Thank you, Mark. If there's anyone
here that can't hear me well, please let me know. Basically, I'd just like to start with reading some of the area objectives from a brochure you may have found in the lobby. E.R.I.E. is a group interested in the preservation and revitalization of the present and historic Erie Canal. In our objectives, we'd like to increase the awareness of the historic canal, become involved in the restoration of historic sites on the original Erie Canal, and enlarge. We'd like to develop the present Erie Canal's potential by establishing recreational pathways, marinas, and park facilities. We'd like to see the development of tourism for local, state, and national benefit of Erie Canal. We're here today because we're trying to establish communications with other canal special interest groups to assist and coordinate common efforts. We'd like to encourage canal communities to provide canal user information on the availability and location of restrooms, grocery stores, restaurants, overnight accommodations, marine facilities, emergency services, canal events, and seasonal local attractions. As Mark mentioned, I have returned to college for a master's degree in landscape architecture, and my undergraduate degree was in natural resources conservation. I'd like to show a few slides of how I got started with E.R.I.E. and my particular interest in seeing a master plan developed for the canal corridor. One of the concerns that I heard during the public hearings that recently were held in '89 and 1990 regarding legislation affecting canal management is the idea that lands along the canal that are no longer deemed necessary for canal use may be sold or have longer-term leases, which in some ways may be good to help the idea of tourism and economic development. But for myself, I had seen no land use inventory to preserve natural areas. You may recognize the satellite photo of the Finger Lakes region and the canal corridor, the edge of Lake Ontario. To quote Mark DeCracker, we have a jewel in our own midst. This photo was taken in May of 1988, looking east from the bridge behind Cannery Row, right here in Newark, New York. This bridge is no longer used for vehicle traffic. It has barriers across it that you have to leap over or climb over in order to cross the bridge. This is the backside of Cannery Row. Again, to quote Mark, let's make the canal our front yard instead of our backyard.
That's actually from John Germano.
Okay, John Germano.
I don't want to get plagiarism involved.
I took these slides because I was preparing for a lecture I was going to give at a solid waste conference in Monroe County. I was looking for examples of solid waste problems for a recycling conference because I wanted to portray the idea of reutilizing and recycling lands and waterways. This is what I found on the banks behind Cannery Row. Through efforts organized by E.R.I.E. and Mark, these banks are now going through spring cleanups. Is that correct?
That's correct.
This was next to the base of the bridge where I took the very pristine slide. And a tributary on the east side of the same bridge. This slide, Mark may be able to identify better than I. It's a bridge abutment,
I think it's the old trolley bed.
trolley, bridge abutment, okay. East of here?
Correct, about a mile
Okay.
and a half east of here.
About a mile and a half east of
On
this
Old Route
location.
31, Old Lions Road.
If you'll notice, it's a very, again, pristine sort of photo, except the center, and those are dead trees. The other side of the canal bank, a salt leachate detention area. I took these slides in succession to try to show what happens with the overflow of this salt leachate. And this is where the flow concentrates. There's erosion around the outlet pipe. This photo is of Mays Point. And I was very pleased to be invited on the canal inspection tour last spring, or actually it was summer. We started off at Mays Point and went from Mays Point to Massillon, New York. I can only apologize that by the time I got to dry docks, I did have a new roll of slides, but my slides from dry docks to Massillon did not turn out. So what I've done here is when we reach the dry docks, I have switched to slides that came out from a canal board tour we took in October of this past year. The inspection tour was to inspect canal locks along the entire length of the canal. And at that time I had the opportunity of meeting folks from the New York State Museum, including Craig Williams. What I'm trying to do is give you just an idea of what can happen along the canal corridor as far as developing it as a recreation way and linkage of park systems. A couple of years ago in Lyons, Mark has some very interesting slides of people fishing along the canal banks, but just bringing up old chairs with springs showing through the chairs, and the canal banks were not improved at all. This slide set also shows the improved park of Lyons, New York, starting from Mays Point. We boarded the tug Syracuse. Claudia also did a section tour with me. This is one of the deck fans. Steve, I understand Steve also has his captain's license, is that correct, Dan? And Dan Geist is in the back of the room with us today. Approaching the next lock beyond Mays Point. What I'm trying to show here is the scale of the water control structure on the right-hand side. And again, locking through. One of Peter Wiles' vessels. And the wake along the canal from the tug Syracuse. I was interested to find out that the rate at which you can travel along the canal is relatively slow. I'm trying to show what a wake can do as far as its activity on the banks causing erosion. The great blue heron. And the approach to Lyons, New York. This particular slide shows part of the improved park. The park was done in cooperation with the Village of Lyons, Department of Public Works, and Erie Canal Matching Grant and McDonald's of Lyons also contributed some money for the park development. The building you see in the background is a future site for a possible mural that Erie is attempting to get some funding for.
Yeah, we've got funding from the Council of the Arts. We have a $1,000 grant, and we're going to raise some more money. And artists have submitted. We got 2 or 3 artists that have submitted applications, and it's hoped that this summer, throughout the summer, the completion of the mural on the building in the center. It's approximately 14 feet high and 72 feet long, so that's quite an undertaking. And we hope to have a dedication on the week after Labor Day. And also, we're having a festival this summer called Peppermint Days, and first weekend in August. And the mural should be actually completed by then. So hopefully we can have these kind of things happen in other communities as well, more Canal Fest.
Again, the approach centralized. The park was actually done on both sides of the bank, and I understand New York State helped assist in getting the lighting for this park. The poppies are getting established along the banks. These are also sites that now have some tulip plantings, and there was another site along the bank that had marigolds spelled in the shape of lions, and then eventually lions.
Right, we separated them to spell lions. They spread out a little more.
This was the only opportunity I've ever had to cross a lock gate, and I really waited for my own turn because there was only a hand railing on one side of that pass. The area on the right-hand side, you see a roadway and a line of evergreens. This has been opened up by activity from the shock incarceration crew, so you now have views from on top of the roadway down to the canal as a connecting pedestrian way between Lyons and Abbey Park. This is Abbey Park. Approaching the dry docks in Lyons, New York. This is where I switched to 2 slides that I got on the Canal Board tour we took in October of last year. We were able to actually walk through the bottom of the dry dock and get a sense of the scale of some of the barges and the construction of the dry dock itself. These slides are from Mudlock on the north end of Onondaga Lake. The Mudlock site is another site that's being looked at for possible restoration. This is of the enlarged area. The next site the Canal Board looked at last fall was at Three Rivers Junction. This land is owned by the state and is quite undeveloped. But it is being spoken of as a possible marina facility. The next site that I'd like to show is a site that's just outside of Syracuse, New York, operated by the town of Camillus, but they have an interesting organization of the way they maintain this site, it's actually gets funds from the town, but volunteers go in and do all the cleaning, and they have their own separate budget. They don't have to deal with getting their own money from Parks and Recreation. Their budget is totally separate. Approximately 7 miles, and this is the Sims Store Museum. For one of the boat structures, they have boat rides, and they call their group the Camillus Navy. Volunteers actually operate the boats and give the guides along the enlarged area. One of the conflicts that I've heard about are the conflict between snowmobilers and pedestrians along the canal corridor. One way they've solved this problem along this section is one side is for pedestrian use and cross-country skiing in the wintertime. The other side is for snowmobilers. Warner's Community Park Plan, which is part of the Camillus Park. This canal bank along the enlarged Erie is part of the Erie Camillus Park, has been cleaned entirely by volunteers. And there is an embankment structure set up because there is the 9 Mile Point Aqueduct that is on the National Register of Historic Places that hopefully will be restored in the near future. And this is a pretty classic photo that you've probably may have seen before, taken from the Erie Canal Museum in Syracuse, New York. Sculpture of a mule and a mule across from the Erie Canal Museum, across Erie Boulevard. This is the top portion of the packet boat in the museum. I'm just taking you through a very short tour of the museum itself and of the packet boat cook area, sleeping quarters, the museum itself. For any of you who have not visited the museum yet, they do have research facilities there as well that can be utilized if the curator is contacted. This structure itself, the Greek Revival structure, was slated for destruction until a group of volunteers got together and basically saved it. Can anyone from the audience tell me which aqueduct these next two slides are from? Onondaga Creek from Tom Grasso, and that's correct. Okay, Craig Williams. This is just to the west side of the Niagara Mohawk building. Erie Boulevard is, you can see very faintly a car in the background. This is the most difficult aqueduct I have found yet in the middle of the metropolitan area. And I used this in one of my presentations at school to fellow students at Syracuse, just to try to get more of an interest in restoring and documenting the historic sites along the canal. Thank you.
And thank you, Pauline. And that brings us very well to the next speaker's topic, Mr. Lance Metz, who's going to be speaking to us about canal restoration. Lance is currently the historian at the Hugh Moore Historical Park and Museum in Allentown, Pennsylvania, Easton, and was kind of perusing his CV, which is certainly most interesting. He served as a historical consultant to the Lou Rita Publications in Easton, and in this capacity he's been a historical advisor to CBS's TV miniseries The Blue and the Gray, and the PBS special The Last Full Measure, The Battle of Gettysburg. And he's also working on the upcoming syndicated series The War Chronicles, and he served as a historical consultant for the 1989 PBS documentary Steelworkers. He's also co-authored and directed for the National Park Service a process documentary on the restoration of Roebling's Delaware Aqueduct, and he's co-author of a script, Lucy, A Canal Boat Woman's Story, which is currently being reviewed by PBS for the American Playhouse. So, Mr. Metz, I'll let you go ahead and continue.
Yes, I've been to that museum. It's nice.
Well, it really is my pleasure to be here today. The Erie Canal is the most important canal in American history, and it's also really the progenitor of elaborate civil engineering. We are not as lucky in Pennsylvania as you are in New York. You still have a working, functioning canal system. We don't have that anymore other than the canalized rivers in the western part of the state. However, we do have something which is rather unique. We have probably the most intact remnant of America's towpath canal system, which is the Lehigh, Delaware canal system, which operated in part up to 1942. Now I'm going to talk to you today about the restoration of a part of the system, the locks at the Hugh Moore Historical Park Museums in eastern Pennsylvania, which have been done twice during the last 25 years. We're very lucky to be able to do this because we still have a tradition of towpath canal maintenance. We were able to tap into the minds and the skills of the last of the towpath canal maintenance workers and boat builders to do this task. Now, I was not directly involved with the restoration. It's not my function at the museum. But I was able to observe a lot of it, and I'll try and give you the best of my expertise on the story of the latest restoration of Lock 48, and also, I believe at the end of the show, guard lock number 8 on the Lehigh navigation. The Hugh Moore Park, where I work, is a joint venture of the City of Easton and also the Hugh Moore Historical Park Museums Incorporated. Hugh Moore is a man who should be more widely known than he is. He invented something we use all the time. He invented the paper cup. Dixie Cup was headquartered in Easton. It was founded by Hugh Moore. Hugh Moore was a pioneer in many respects. He was a pioneer advocating population control. He was a pioneer conservationist. And on his death, he left a large sum of money to the City of Easton to buy the last 8 miles of the Lehigh, the lower 8 miles of the Lehigh, to be incorporated into the new park named designer. This is immediately adjacent to the Delaware Canal, which is a 60-mile-long state park owned by the state of Pennsylvania. Hugh Moore's foresight and funds made it possible to restore this section of towpath canal and put it back in operation. Now, why is this section so important? Why was he so interested in doing it? Well, the beginning of navigation in the Lehigh is rather interesting. Lehigh and Delaware are really one system. In fact, in the old days, the Lehigh was called the West Branch of the Delaware. And the area where they come together, right where our Canal Museum is at, was called the Forks of Delaware. Navigation goes back a long time. Those of you, of course, who are interested in early New York navigation recognize this vessel as a Durham boat. Well, Durham boats were invented on the Delaware River about 9 miles south of our museum. They were built to haul pig iron to Philadelphia. Later on, they became general cargo carriers and operated in our area until the 1860s. From there, they went to the Schuylkill River. From there, the design was taken to the Mohawk, and from the Mohawk up into Canada. So Durham boats are rather interesting vessels, and they pioneered the use of the Lehigh and Delaware rivers. But the real impetus for the development of the Lehigh navigation and connecting Delaware Canal was the discovery during the 1750s of massive quantities of anthracite coal. Now, The Lehigh and Delaware system would have been built in one form or the other had the Erie not been built or even dreamed of. There really are two different types of canals in America. Canals like the Erie and New York State system, which go from point to point for trans-regional cargo, regional cargo, and canals like we have in eastern Pennsylvania, which are primary raw commodity, primary resource haulers. The idea is build these waterways, improve them, and ram down as much anthracite coal as you could get to the markets in Philadelphia and New York. These were the anthracite tidewater canals, and they're very unique. They were later rebuilt in the 1830s and 1820s with a lot of Erie technology, but the beginning of them actually starts in the 1790s, and by 1820 they had evolved a very unique descending navigation system to haul this coal. Anthracite coal became the primary industrial fuel of America due to the fact that we destroyed many of our forests through overuse and for the production of charcoal for iron. So anthracite coal, to get in the market, really involved the building of these waterways. The people who did the most of this were these two gentlemen, Josiah White and Erskine Hazard, who really developed one of the earliest integrated corporations in America, the Lehigh Coal Navigation Company, which mined coal, transported it, used it for manufacturing, and of course helped to bring about an industrial revolution in the United States by applying the use of coal rather than charcoal to iron production, and made the Lehigh Valley, as in many places in New York, an early model for the Industrial Revolution. And due to the fact that this private company operated these canals for an awfully long time, we have a superlative visual record, which you'll see in my second presentation today, of how they actually operate. You'll actually see towpath canals in full operation. Well, the Lehigh-Delaware system lasted in full operation until 1932. Part of the Lehigh remained in operation, partial operation, as a coal dirt operation until 1942. Coal dirt meant that they dumped so much fine-sized coal into the canals that they had to remove it, and they later found that this fine-sized coal was very, very good as an industrial fuel when they developed the idea of burning pulverized coal and blowing it into furnaces. So all throughout the 1920s up to the 1940s, literally millions of tons of fine-sized coal were taken from the Lehigh navigation, put on canal boats, and taken to various industries and sold. And this traffic lasted until 1942 when the flood destroyed the canal. And it really wasn't until the early 60s when Hugh Moore came into the picture that any effective work was done to try and revitalize the Lehigh navigation system. This is a map showing the entire Lehigh navigation system and its connecting canals, the Delaware, of course, and the Morris. And I'll point out to the area first of my focus. Okay, it's hard for me to tell from this angle. Thank you, Tom. The entire Lehigh-Delaware system, its greatest extension, goes from Whitehaven, then by connecting railroad to Wilkes-Barre, all the way down to Bristol on Philadelphia Tidewater. It's approximately 120 miles in length. The Delaware part, which was built by the state of Pennsylvania, later run by Lehigh Coal Navigation, is 60 miles long, the National Historic Landmark, and is also the most intact because it's fully watered with all of its locks there. None of them work, but they still are there. It's the most intact towpath canal in the United States of America. It's run by the state of Pennsylvania as a state park. Lehigh Navigation had two parts. The main stem of the canal, which was completed in its initial form in 1821, rebuilt by Erie engineers in 1827, 1829, and remained in operation in part in 1942. That begins here at Mock Chunk, modern-day Jim Thorpe, goes down through the mountains through Allentown, Bethlehem, and ends right here at Easton. They had an upper grand section which overcame over 700 foot of elevation, got up here to Whitehaven. That lasted for approximately 20 years and it was destroyed by floods in 1862. Now the part of the canal we're talking about basically is the canal from right about where this A is in canal here through Easton. This is part of section 8 of the Lehigh Canal, which was purchased by Hugh Moore. He gave it to the city of Easton, and he also gave a large trust fund, it's well over $1 million, to maintain the canal, also go to bring about its development. The city over the years has gradually come to the conclusion, as we talked earlier about Camillus, that it's not really a city park's function so much to run this waterway, but to use a private nonprofit to do most of the work. So it's a combination of city funding and private nonprofit leadership, which has brought about what you're going to see now, the second restoration of Section 8 of the Lehigh Navigation System. This is guard lock number 8 of Lehigh Navigation as it was first restored approximately 20 years ago. This is a very interesting scene because what they did was they organized over 500 canoeists to take the very first trip through the canal before we had our canal boat ride in operation. One of the things we were able to tap into to a degree is we had extraordinarily detailed plans of the Lehigh Navigation and all of its structures. And they went out and hired a very, very good carpenter who was used to working in heavy timbers and do the original restoration. And he also reused all the original ironware. These locks have only been out of operation about 20 years. This part of the canal had actually been watered for almost 10 years before they started restoration. So they had the original gates, not the original gates as built, but the last gates in this lock, operating locks, to work with its models and also all the original plans. However, there were several mistakes made. One of the mistakes was that they didn't realize they had not done at that time enough research to really tie on all loose ends, that these gates originally had been painted. These gates were constructed out of heavy-duty oak and pine timbers, and they originally had been painted with several coats of big, heavy, sort of Spanish brown lead-based paint, oil and lead-based paint. This was not done. This later caused problems. Also, because the locks were not operated in a regular schedule, they had enormous problems with rot right about the waterline. Now, the Canal Museum and the Hugh Moore Historical Park Museums evolved an awful lot over the 20-year period. The Canal Boat Ride was introduced. I was hired as historian. An executive director came online who was very interested. And we also started doing a lot more research and a lot more oral history work with the remaining canal boat maintenance workers and boatmen. Unfortunately, after about 18 years, a lot of problems had occurred. This side of white brought a lot of attention to the canal. This is our canal boat ride, and we started using the locks on a more regular basis. Instead of just using them on rare occasion, we started using them several times a month as part of our special charter rides. Unfortunately, due to the location of our loading dock and the time limitation to school groups, not every canal boat ride on our canal goes through the locks, but enough of them do to realize that very soon that we had some problems. Here we see this is lock 48 in operation. All of our charter rides go through it. All of our regularly scheduled evening canal boat rides, we run about 6 of those a month, go through it. And it really is one of our great treasures. There was originally another lock identical to this on the other side. Unfortunately, at the time the restoration was first done, they could not restore this lock. Funds were not available. The ironware and woodwork was recorded. It was taken out, and the lock was filled with clean fill. So this is the only fully functional towpath canal lock in the state of Pennsylvania or in the state of New Jersey, and it carries on a given season about 25,000 people. Here we're going down. We bring them into the lock. We raise them up. We lower them down. We raise them back up and back the boat out. We could go down to the next lock, which is the outlet lock into the slackwater section of the Lehigh River, except for 2 problems. One is we have an old bridge which goes across that lock, which we cannot do without pass through without taking the canopy off the boat, and it's too hot in the summertime to do that. And secondly, if we go into the slackwater section of the river, the Coast Guard would force us to have a licensed master mariner on board, and life preservers for everyone on the boat, and that becomes too expensive. So we basically just demonstrate the lock and back you out at the end of it. Now this is how this appeared. This is guard lock number 8, about 2.5, 3 years ago. And you see we're starting to get some major problems. You can see we get rot. You see we also have structural problems. Fortunately, we have working with us an unusual gentleman, Mr. Richard Arner, who is 78 years old, and he was the last towpath canal maintenance worker or boat builder in Pennsylvania. And he was able to come up with enough jury-rigged systems for us to get through the season 2 years ago. He showed us how they had done the repairs, how they rebuilt everything from dams to lock, and his expertise, including designing these 2 hatches here, enabled us to get through the season. This is very, very critical. This is the upstream miter gate, guard lock number 8, and this basically serves as a dam besides serving as a gate. And had this blown, we would have had enormous flooding in the canal. And so we really were very grateful for what Mr. Warner had done. He has been with us since about 15 years ago. His expertise could not be duplicated, I don't think, anywhere in America. This is the drop gate. In New York State, you call it fall gates on Lock 48. The drop gate was basically invented on the Lehigh navigation by a gentleman called E.R.I.E. Douglas. They started installing them in the 1830s on the Lehigh. They went from the Lehigh to the Morris, from the Morris to the Delaware and Merritt, from Delaware and Merritt to Delaware and Hudson, and some of the locks in the Delaware Canal were rebuilt. The idea was the water pressure is equal to above and beyond. You could drop this gate down, and you could cut maybe 4 or 5 minutes off your locking time. It's horizontally hinged. And this, again, is a very important structure. This is the lower dam, shall we say, on our section of canal, because if this were to blow, all the water would run out against the miters and just take them out. So this is a very important structure that had to be maintained. We had enormous problems with the face planking, also, of course, the large structural timbers here. This iron collar you see here basically is used as a weight to now the gate to descend to the bottom of the canal, drops back this way in order for the boat to pass over. The wickets which bring the water into the lock are located behind right here on the bottom of the canal, the roller wickets, and they are relatively effective. Now, we interviewed a lot of people before we decided to go through our restoration. The original carpenter who had done the work for us, Gordon Morris, had retired. And Mr. Arner, even though he was willing to work with us as an advisor, was not up to doing heavy timber work. So we found a gentleman who was a canal enthusiast and also had very recommendations called Marcus Grant. And Marcus specialized in doing 3 things: covered bridges, heavy barns, and old homes. And Marcus came through and he said, look, I could do the job for you. I want to do the job for you. He became very heavily involved with us. He was willing to work with us and Mr. Arner. And he was hired, Marcus Grant Restoration Incorporated was hired to do the work. This is Marcus here and his 3-man crew as they're beginning to work on this really year-long restoration project. I can't speak enough about Marcus. He's a little bit of a character. And he is a rather colorful individual, but he is a superlative craftsman. He has since gone on to work in 4 or 5 other canal restorations in Pennsylvania and points south due to the recommendations we were able to give him. Several decisions had to be made dealing with this canal. First off, we were determined we were not going to restore the original materials. We were not going to go back with oak again. Several reasons before that. Even though we knew that they had been painted and we had not realized the first time. In Pennsylvania, the Department of Environmental Resources, no, you can't use heavy linseed oil and lead-based paint around the waterway anymore, and we were not going to go. We were not going to go if we couldn't paint it. Secondly, we were having a difficult time getting a large enough structural timbers, oak timbers, to do it. And thirdly, we had worked with the National Park Service on the Roebling Aqueduct, and the Park Service had very good success using longleaf yellow pine and western Douglas fir as our structural members being pressure treated. And so we decided we were going to go with pressure treated timbers, which could meet our strength specifications and also meet our durability specifications. And that's what we decided to do. We were going to continually treat these also with linseed oil. We could use that. So we think we're going to be okay. We think we'll probably get 25 or 30 years out of this raised restoration. This is the drop gate being put in place. This took them about 3 months to do. One of the intriguing things we learned during the course of this project was learned from Mr. Arner. We asked him, well, you guys had to replace drop gates. How did you do it? What did you do? Well, we simply carried around with us, he says, on the carpenter's boat and on the mud diggers. We simply carried with us an old drop gate. And so we dropped the old drop gate in, banked earth around it, and made the old drop gate a temporary dam. So what we did was we simply lifted the old drop gate off of its hinges, a socket right here, and used as a temporary dam, coffer dam here for the dry lock out for the fabrication of the new drop gate. Also helped, going back in 1 second by the way, it also helps that we have a large capacity crane that we own ourselves. We have found out the hard way that you can't borrow things from the city and state on a regular basis, so we went ahead with the city's money and purchased a large surplus heavy capacity crane so we can do almost anything we want. This was one of our best investments. It cost us really pennies because of the surplus. It cost us thousands to get the repair parts because they're all military specs, but it's still cheaper and less frustrating to have to borrow a crane all the time. This is what you would exit out into. This is looking upstream. You would pass, this is the pool here over the, and by the dam. You pass through this to go into the section of canal, which is working on the restore. The other end of it, which is 2.5 miles away, is guard lock number 8. This is the dam number 8. It was rebuilt by the state of Pennsylvania. It's a concrete structure. This is the feeder structure here, which put water in for hydropower, and this is guard lock number 8. This was our biggest problem because it had this thing blown out. We would have had enormous problems in the park, and we didn't want to fool with it. This lock tender's house, by the way, was the last lock tender's house we think built for a towpath canal. It was built in the middle 20s. We've now restored it as a lock tender's house museum with a living history demonstrations to give you an idea what lock tender's life was in operation. And that red color, by the way, is pretty much the red color that would have been painted, the woodwork would have been painted in the canal. The Lehigh Coal Navigation had their own paint mill near Slatington. They produce literally tons of this paint on a yearly basis. Here is the upstream miter gates. The upstream miter gates have to serve several things. They have to serve as a flood wall, and also as the entry and exit point between the slack water pool beyond. They were in really bad shape, and had they blown, and the sill down below here was extraordinary bad condition. Had they blown, we would have been big problems. This was the first priority after the reconstruction of the drop gate. Basically, all the timber was brought in, roughly pre-cut, and it was up to Marcus and his crew to do the shaping. We got the timber from a timber merchant in Chesapeake City, Maryland. He met our specification. We did a lot of investigation because there are a lot of shysters out there in this business, unfortunately. And so far, we had no problems at all. Gives you an idea of the size of the timbers and planking we were dealing with. Some of the tools Marcus was using. A lot of the templates and a lot of the design Marcus took off the original gates, and also the completely detailed plans that we have of all the structures on the Lehigh Navigation. All the ironware on this gate, by the way, is original ironware from the 1876 rebuilding. It's been in here that long and lasted quite a long time with good use. It was really well cast when it was put together. Doing the preliminary shaping. Constantly checking. He's going to inset this here for an iron band. It was taken off, you'll see in a few minutes, it was taken off the original gate after final shaping. Here he's putting together the Morrison tendon joints. This is rather interesting also. This is one of the things that Mr. Arner taught us. We had not done it earlier. The plans are not exactly the way that it was done during the last 50 years on the canal. They developed this sort of step joint to give a little extra strength to the gate. And that did not show in the company's maintenance plans. It was something that the maintenance workers themselves just did during the 20s and 30s for extra strength, and it was not ever recorded in the company's master maintenance log. So as a result of Mr. Arner's input, we were able to come up with this joint that was developed by the canal boat maintenance workers themselves, during their own experience in the 20s and 30s. A lot of as work, that's what Marcus did. Almost all the fine fitting and almost all the fine as work Marcus did himself. He has several hundred different types of woodworker's tools, and he was able to hook almost anything we needed out of the back of his truck. Of course, a PV used to turn timbers over. Of course, wherever possible, we did use power tools. You have to keep your budget down. The entire cost of the restoration of all 3 locks, by the way, was around $250,000. That's with us supplying most of the materials, supplying our own expertise, and trying to every corner we could. So it was $150,000 for the basic work, and by the time everything was out of transportation, you had an extra $100,000 into it. You can see the steps that were built into this. socket in order to hold, which I showed you earlier, and also the arsenates, which were used to pressure treat the lumber. And here we see the main structure of the gate being ready for assembly. Getting ready to this final assembly work on it. And of course, the iron collar I talked about earlier was taken off the original, cleaned up to a degree, rough fitted, got blazing hot, then shrunk fit for a good tight fit. This is one of the special mauls that Marcus developed, helpers he called them, to do a lot of the work. Quite an interesting process. We recorded this thing, by the way, both with literally hundreds of slides and also some videotape. There, of course, you see it shrunk fit into the main post of the gate. This is going to be on top of the main post. You're going to see the what's known as the harness on here, which is going to hold the turnbuckles that give support as the gate swings open and closed. And there's one of his big helpers you see set up on a tripod with a human helper giving him a hand. And during the course of our Canal Festival, we have an annual Canal Festival every year which features canal folk life. Over 100 artists and craftsmen. We also have canal music, classical music, big band music, half-price canal boat rides, Canal Boatmen's Reunion. Marcus set this display up here, and he and Mr. Reiner talked about the process 2 summers ago at our Canal Festival to give people an idea of what we were doing. And of course, we're lifting the gates up with a big crane. You can see the wicket chambers here, which are going to hold the wickets. I'll get back up here a minute. That's my boss, Steve Humphrey, there, and this is the large capacity crane we have lifting them up, set them into place. These are the gates, by the way. This set right here are the downstream miter gates at Lock 48. You can see the fit was very good, and it's given us no problems since that time. These are weep holes up here, by the way, when the block was full of excess water out. Here he's putting the harness back on, the turnbuckles adjusting them. And when the gates swung free, they swung with no problem, and they were mitered together properly, so there was almost no leakage. This is a doghouse. Unlike the balance beam you saw here in some of the earlier Erie lots, the doghouse is what they used on the Lehigh and Delaware system. It's basically a crank and ratchet system with a large arm going out to the gate to open and close the gates. That had a lot of rock problems. As you see the lock before it was restored, here is the miter gate arms going into the doghouse. And these doghouses were completely restored by Marcus. Now, we fabricated the critical miter gates for the upstream part of guard lock number 8 down in our big field by our maintenance building. And we had the problem of how are we going to transport the gates up to where they have to be dropped. We didn't want to run this big crane in the tow path any more than we have to because it's quite heavy and it can cause some damage. So what do we do? Well, we put the gates in the canal. Marcus took one of the wicket paddles here and used it temporarily as a rudder. And we got Copper and Jackie, our 2 canal boat mules, hooked them up, put everybody in costume, and played Tom Sawyer. All right. And we got good coverage of local TV stations, which turned all the footage over to us. And we got them up into the guard lock with no problem. Put them into place. They were set and adjusted, and that was the conclusion of the major part of Marcus's work. I think I've gone over my time, but I want to thank you very much for seeing something that we spent a lot of time and money to do, and I think they're going to last for 25 years, hopefully. Thank you.
And thank you for that. that fascinating presentation and a look into the restoration, which we're looking forward to for our own Erie Canal here as well. And certainly appreciate some of those insights, and I'm sure we'll be looking forward to seeing a lot more of Lance and the rest of the people at the Hugh Moore Museum as we get toward our restoration project. Well, restoration projects, of course, also involve time and money, and as he mentioned, a lot of involvement from city, county, and other governments. And we have with us a guest, Assemblyman Bob King from Fairport, and his district includes Macedon and Parrington here on the Erie Canal. And so I'll ask Bob to talk just a little bit about his involvement with the canal, and he's got a great deal of personal interest in the canal and so forth. So Bob, why don't you come on up and tell us a little bit more about the government side of things.
In these days of tough budgets in New York, I'm not sure you want to hear about the government side, but first I just have to tell you that number one, I'm delighted to be here, and second, I'm absolutely overwhelmed by both the history, the efforts that you've been doing in Pennsylvania, and the fact that there are so many people interested in this terrific resource that, as John Germano has said, is too long been in our backyard. For those of you that don't know, please come and visit my office in Fairport. It is immediately above the Route 250 bridge over the canal, and I'm now, whenever I get a chance, being a sidewalk superintendent to the restoration of the north wall across the canal from my desk. Let me tell you just quickly, and the things that we see in Albany right now start with the very fundamental question from legislators across this state who don't share a district that touches on the Erie Canal. The first question is there really still an Erie Canal? The second question usually is there any water in it? The third one is, does anybody use it? And the last one, which is perhaps ultimately the most important, is why should we do anything? For those of you who are following the government, when you aren't doing something far more productive, last year, frankly, quite by accident, I stumbled down the corridors of the Legislative Office building to meet with a former colleague of mine in the Assembly who is now the chairman of the Senate Committee on Tourism and Recreation and whatever else they call it, a guy by the name of John Sheffer. And I said, John, you know, can't we do something about this canal? And to my surprise, John was well ahead of me. And I learned that the very quiet recesses of the legislators from the western end of the state, Matt Murphy and Joe Pelletier in the Assembly, who are from the Buffalo and Niagara Falls area, and John Sheffer, who is from the Amherst and a little bit east of their area, the plans were already underway to get the state government to start to understand and more fully respect what we have. That respect is being demonstrated in a number of pieces of legislation, the most important of which is a bill which we hope we will see this year, and I spoke with John this week, and I think I see Luke Rich in the back, so he may be able to talk to you more succinctly about it. But the first thing that we need to do is to pass a constitutional amendment that will enable both the land use and the fee issues around restoring the canal to be brought into the 20th and hopefully 21st century. The important thing to understand about constitutional amendments is before the voters get to vote on them, they have to be passed by two separately elected legislatures. Now what that means is that because this year is an election year, the legislative session we're now in is about to come to a close at the end of 1990. So before we go out of existence this session, we need to vote and pass that particular proposed constitutional amendment. There will be an election in 1990 and a newly elected legislature, although it may or may not be the same faces, will take office in January of '91. That legislature will also have to vote on and pass a second time in the same form the proposed amendments. And then if that occurs, November of '91, the voters of this state will then have an opportunity to actually vote and cause the amendment to the Constitution. If we don't vote on it this year because of the two separately elected legislatures issue, it means that this whole process really gets set back 2 years. So it's very important for those of you that live in other parts of the state to get your legislatures attuned, and I know many of them are already, to the need to get this legal stuff going. The other issue that the legislature will be dealing with over the next couple of years is what is the right home for this much longer term project. Do we leave it in the Department of Transportation? Do we move it to the Department of Parks, Recreation, and Historic Preservation? Do we create some new joint effort between those two departments, or do we create a separate authority, like the Thruway Authority, for example, or the Dormitory Authority, whose principal responsibility it would be to reinvigorate and restore and plan for the sensible and longer-term development of this resource. So those are the legislative questions that are being considered, and those of you who have attended the hearings around the state, I know that you've been speaking to those issues, and I can assure you that the legislators are listening. The other things that I just want to report to you, and then I'm going to stop talking because I've got to run to Rochester and make a speech, is this. There is enormous interest across the state, and many of you that are here reflect that interest. We had in Fairport back in a very cold, rainy day in November, town officials, Chamber of Commerce people, and other interested folks that came over here on a bus trip from the Utica, Little Falls, Herkimer area. And I took them on a combination of a series of meetings with local officials in Fairport, to a tour of our waterfront in Fairport, the Parrington Park, which is just to the west around the bend, and we finished up at Richardson's Canal House and had Andy Wolf share with us some terrific history about the canal house itself and the development of the canal, which has moved from one side of the building to the other in the various constructions of the canal. And also one story I'll share with you. Apparently in the very early days, when the canal would have been on the south side of the building, the original building, the water level was probably just a few inches below the water level in the main saloon, which was underneath the sleeping quarters for many of the people that plied the canal in those days. And Andy tells the story that if the barkeep either was stingy with the drinks or was otherwise not in conformity with whatever the mood of his patrons were, the very next day or perhaps that evening they would run the canal boats up and down in front as quickly as they could, causing the weight to slosh over into the bar. And it's one of my favorite stories about Richardson. But it's clear to me that with the interest that those folks are showing, with the growing interest, and I think very sincere, I know very sincere interest on the part of the people who have been so actively working on the Seaway Trail, and they see some opportunities here to link the Seaway Trail, which runs from, if you know, Lake Erie and the Welland Canal all the way up into the Thousand Islands area. To make the linkage with whatever it is we're going to be doing with the canal really creates a very, very broad-based and I think important recreation and historic resource for the state. Two last comments. The first is that I've been running in my office an annual art contest for high school and elementary school students. And we award 3 scholarships every year to the 3 winners to summer art classes at the Memorial Art Gallery in Rochester. Since all of this began last year, we have dedicated our art contest this year to the canal. And we're asking all the kids that are participating throughout my district, which includes towns that don't touch the canal, not only to participate in terms of the usual artistic efforts that they do, and there's some great stuff that we get each year, but also asking these kids to do essays. And through that encourage the teachers to be educating these kids on more than just the rudimentary information about the Erie Canal. And we're looking forward to receiving this stuff within the next couple of weeks. So I will be doing my best to try and encourage increasing interest in the people in our area. And I would suggest that you might encourage your local legislators to do things like that, to help broaden the base of interest in what we're doing. And finally, I just want to close by commending you for your efforts. The fact that you've come from so many parts of the state and have, in doing so, sent a very strong message to me, which I'll carry back to Albany, about the level of your interest and support and commitment to this marvelous project. I'm very confident that we'll be succeeding. Again, thanks for having me. Keep up the great work. I'm sorry I can't stay for the rest of the day. But Luke, I'm sure, will brief me when we get back to Albany next week. Thanks so much.